I remember the bitter taste of ash coating my tongue on the day the sky itself split apart. It was the taste of our world dying. We had thought we knew war. We were soldiers of the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, trained to face traitors and Xenos with rifle and bayonet. But nothing had prepared us for this. Nothing had prepared us for the nightmares that spilled from the tear in reality above Habrium Prime. I crouched behind the half-collapsed wall of a burned-out hab block, pressing my back against scorched plasteel. My heart thundered in my chest, each breath ragged and hot with the reek of smoke and blood. Around me, the once bustling Manufacturum district lay in ruins. Blackened spires jutted into a sky painted wrong, swirls of bruised purple and diseased green clouds where there should have been clear daylight. Jagged lightning forked silently across the heavens, brightening the hellscape in fitful strobe flashes. In those brief illuminations, I could see things moving in the distant haze, misshapen silhouettes slithering or lurching among the shattered buildings. I muttered a prayer under my breath, my voice trembling. The Emperor is my light and salvation. The Emperor is my shield. The familiar words of the infantryman's prayer quavered as they left my lips. I wanted to believe them. I tried to picture the God Emperor's golden light piercing the unnatural gloom, protecting us as we had always been taught. But as another volley of horrific shrieks echoed through the distant streets, my faith wavered. How could his light reach a place so drenched in darkness? A stifled sob from my left pulled me back to the moment. Guardsman Laras, one of my remaining squad mates, huddled behind a pile of rubble not 5 paces away. In the flicker of warp light from the sky, I saw his wide eyes, shimmering with tears he was desperate to hide. He was cradling something in his arms, the torn, soot-streaked remains of our regiment's banner. The Aquila emblem was scarcely recognizable beneath the grime and blood. Laras, I hissed softly. The young man's gaze snapped up to meet mine. He couldn't have been more than 19, a conscript from some agri-world, fighting on a planet he'd probably never heard of until a few months ago. We all were. Laras, steady on, I whispered, forcing what I hoped was a reassuring nod. Keep your head, soldier. The Emperor protects. At those words, a faint spark of focus returned to his eyes. He swallowed and nodded shakily, clenching the tattered banner to his chest as if it could shield him from the horror around us. The Emperor protects, he echoed in a broken whisper. I prayed he couldn't hear the uncertainty in my own voice. Another of our number, Corporal Janes, edged closer, keeping low. Her flak armor was scratched and smeared with soot, one shoulder guard completely gone. Dried blood, not all of it hers, streaked her face, yet her jaw was set in determination. Sergeant Hale, she addressed me quietly, though there was an urgency under her words. We can't stay here. They'll be back. The things that took Merrin and Salik, they're still out there. My name is Sergeant Arden Hale, of the 301st Brontian Longknives, or what remains of it. Hearing my own name and rank, spoken by one of my soldiers amidst this nightmare, grounded me for a moment. I was the highest ranking left now, for whatever that was worth. I licked my cracked lips and nodded to Janes. She was right. We had been on the move since before dawn, ever since our defensive line at the hab blocks was overrun. Staying put too long was suicide. Every time we paused, they found us again. I risked a peek over the crumbling wall. The street beyond was a wasteland of cracked rockcrete, littered with burnt-out ground cars and the broken bodies of civilians and guardsmen alike. Many of the corpses were weeks old, from the early days of the uprising, now reduced to gnawed bones and flies. But others were fresh, torn apart in ways I didn't want to imagine too closely. A dense, unnatural fog clung to the ground in patches, coiling around the dead and shifting with shapes that almost looked like grasping hands or faces before dispersing again. In the distance, through drifting smoke, I glimpsed the towering silhouette of Habrium's central cathedral spire. Once it had been an inspiring sight, a beacon visible across the city. Now its elegant Gothic arches were shattered and scorched. The great Aquila icon toppled from its peak. I could just make out a crude symbol daubed across the facade in smeared blood, an 8-pointed star encircled by blasphemous runes. My stomach turned at the sight, and I ducked back down. Not far behind us, deeper in the rubble-choked alley we'd come through, lay the bodies of 2 more of my squad. Merrin and Salik had been good soldiers. Now Merrin's remains were strewn across the alley in a broad smear of gore, and poor Salik. Only his severed arm remained where I last saw him alive. The rest of him had been dragged off into the darkness by whatever those things were. Even now I could hear them, prowling at the edge of the flickering lamplight we'd set atop the rubble pile, chittering, insectile noises and guttural growls that set every hair on my body standing on end. I clutched my laser gun tighter and checked the power pack by reflex. 3/4 charge remaining, enough for perhaps 30 shots on full power. 30 last bolts, against Emperor knew what number of nightmares out there. On my belt, I still had 2 frag grenades and my combat blade, useless if those things swarmed us at close range. My finger rested on the trigger guard, and I realized it was trembling. Emperor, steady my hand, I begged silently. Sergeant, any word on the Vox? Janes asked in a hushed tone. She already knew the answer but needed to ask, needed some scrap of hope that someone was out there listening. I shook my head grimly. The portable Vox unit built into my command headset had died not long after our position fell. Last I'd heard on the regiment's channel were frantic voices from command, then a burst of agonized screams and a noise like tearing metal, then static. We'd been operating in an eerie communications void since. Voxcasters simply wailed with harsh feedback whenever we tried them, as if the air itself was too saturated with warp-spawned interference for signals to get through. No signal, I replied quietly. Either High Command's gone or the warp storm's jamming everything. Maybe both, I hesitated, then added in as firm a voice as I could muster. We're on our own, Janes. For now, at least. We stick to the plan, make for the spaceport. If there's anyone left up there, that's where they'll be. Janes nodded, her dirt-streaked face betraying only a flicker of fear. I admired her courage, or at least her discipline in swallowing the fear. Troopers like Laris were barely holding together, but Janes, she reminded me of the women from my home world, tough, unyielding. A series of distant pops echoed off the canyon of ruins to our east. Lasergun fire. It was followed by a faint, inhuman screech that curdled my blood. Someone was still alive over there, fighting, and something else was answering. The noise faded quickly, swallowed by the unnatural heavy silence that reasserted itself. That silence was one of the worst parts. No normal city sounds, no machinery hum or human chatter, only the occasional distant scream or bizarre laughter carried on the toxic breeze. Laras wiped his nose with a dirty sleeve. Do you think the evac shuttles will still be there, Sarge? He asked me quietly, voice trembling on each syllable. At the spaceport. I drew a slow breath. I had to lie to him, or at least bend the truth. It was all I could do. If any made it off-world, they'd regroup there. Yes, I answered. The Navy won't abandon us completely. They might have pulled back temporarily. Even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Orbital strikes had pounded sections of the city days ago. I saw with my own eyes the flashes of lance beams scorching whole districts in cleansing fire. That was before the clouds rolled in and cut us off from the sky. For all I knew, the fleet had already declared exterminatus and left us to burn. But I kept that to myself. The others needed the hope of possible extraction to keep moving. If they knew how slim it was, despair would root them in place, and then we'd certainly die. "All right," I said, steel in my voice that I only partly felt. "We move on my mark. Same formation as before. Janes, you take point. I'll keep rearguard. Laris, you stay between us and keep that banner wrapped. Don't let it snag on anything." It was busy work to occupy his mind. The banner was of no practical use now, but if clinging to it gave him comfort, I wouldn't deprive him. We head north through these Hab ruins till we hit the main avenue, then west toward the spaceport. We move quick and quiet. No lights aside from the lamp pack, and we cover it if we hear anything. Understood? They nodded. We had done this several times already today, weaving through debris-choked side streets and alleys, ducking horrors when we could, fighting only when we had no choice. It had started at sunrise with nearly 20 survivors from our company. Now we were 3. "Emperor guide us," Janes murmured, drawing the sign of the Aquila across her chest. I mirrored the gesture, as did Laris with a shaking hand. I took one last glance at the flickering lamp set on the rubble pile behind us, casting just enough glow to keep the lurking creatures at bay. We'd rigged a chemical flare beside it, set to ignite in a minute's time, a distraction for anything watching. "Go," I whispered. In a flash of coordinated movement born of long drill and desperate practice, Jane slipped out of cover and moved down the street to our right, laser-gun raised. Laras followed close, trying his best to step lightly despite the rubble underfoot. I slung my own laser-gun momentarily to grab the lamp and flare, hurling them farther down the alley behind us. They clattered loudly, and at once the chittering and growls in the darkness spiked in excitement. As the flare's fuse sizzled, I was already running low in Jane's and Laris' wake. I counted the seconds in my head. 3, 4, 5. A searing green flash erupted back down the alley, accompanied by a whoosh of ignition. The feral cacophony peaked in a frenzy of screeches. I didn't look back. Whatever nightmare pack that had stalked us would hopefully be distracted by the sudden burst of light and heat, at least for a short while. We slipped through the shell of a Hab block, past rooms open to the elements. I saw huddled shapes of dead civilians in those rooms as we hurried by, families who had tried to take shelter. Their empty eyes seemed to follow us in accusation or plea. I forced myself not to stop. There was no helping them. Some had clearly been dead for weeks, caught in the crossfire of the initial riots, or hiding only to be found by the hunters that now roamed the city. My boots crunched glass from shattered plastic windows as I moved. Up ahead, Janes raised a clenched fist and we halted. I crept forward to where she knelt behind a collapsed statue in what had once been a small plaza between Habs. She pointed 2 fingers to her eyes, then across to the opposite side of the plaza. I followed the gesture. Corpses. At least a dozen of them strewn across the plaza's center, near a dry fountain. The figures were twisted, blackened. Even in the dim warp light I could see many were half melted into the rockcrete, limbs fused to the ground. A heavy stench of burned meat hung in the still air. It was a scene of utter carnage. Janes leaned to whisper in my ear, her breath trembling. "Those aren't from our regiment, sir. PDFS, maybe." Or locals. I squinted again. She was right. The bodies wore scraps of clothing, not guard flak. Likely Hab workers or militia volunteers. But what could have done this to them? Some were charred as if by Promethean fire. Others rent apart as though by massive claws. I spotted what looked like the remains of an improvised barricade nearby, overturned carts and sandbags. They must have made a stand here, however briefly. Laras caught up to us then, and the moment his eyes fell on the grisly scene, he let out a gagging sound and doubled over. He vomited noisily onto the ground before he could stop himself. The retching sound echoed off the plaza's walls. In that same instant, a low growl emanated from somewhere ahead, a wet, throaty snarl that set my teeth on edge. Janes and I froze. Laras wiped his mouth, eyes wide in panic as he realized the noise he'd made. The snarl came again, from the shadows beneath a collapsed awning on the far side of the fountain. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, a shape emerged from that darkness, hunching forward on all fours. In the pale, sickly green glow from the sky, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was as large as a bull grox, its gaunt frame covered in mangy fur slick with ichor. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, ending in hooked claws that scraped the stone as it moved. The head was vaguely canine but horribly wrong, a fanged muzzle too wide, eyes burning like hot coals set into a face that split with multiple slavering jaws. A serpentine tail whipped behind it, ending in a bony spine. The creature panted with a sound like a furnace bellows, each exhalation a gout of steaming breath despite the warm air. I had seen pictures in the field guide of the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer, crude sketches of mutants and abominations meant to harden us against fear. But the sketches hadn't captured the living, moving horror of this thing. My hands tightened on my lasgun as it prowled closer, sniffing at the air. Drool, or perhaps blood, dripped from its primary jaw. I could smell it now, a nauseating blend of sulfur and spoiled meat. Warp-spawned hound. The thought flickered in my mind from some half-remembered lecture by our commissar. He had warned us early in the campaign of what signs to watch for. Impossible creatures, the never-born. We hadn't believed we would truly see them. We were wrong. Janes, steady as ever, had her weapon up, lining a shot on the beast. I quickly put a hand on her shoulder and shook my head. The creature hadn't seen us yet. Its vision might be poor. It seemed to be tracking by scent or sound. If we fired now, the muzzle flare would give away our exact position, and Emperor knew how many more might be lurking nearby. I motioned silently, pointing back the way we'd come, trying to indicate we should withdraw and skirt around this plaza entirely. We started to inch backward, one slow step at a time. Laras was still gasping softly, his nerves shattered. He clutched the scrap of banner like a talisman. As he moved, a bit of loose ferrocrete wobbled under his boot with a loud crack. The demon hound's ears pricked up. It swung its massive head toward us, sniffing loudly. In the gloom, those burning eyes locked straight onto Laras. It moved with terrifying speed. With a snarl that rippled through the air, the creature lunged across the plaza, its claws scrabbling and limbs springing like coiled wire. "Contact front!" Janes shouted, opening fire. The sharp crack, crack, crack of her lasgun shattered the dead hush. Red beams lanced out, striking the beast's torso. I heard it yelp, one shot scorching a smoking hole in its flank. But it did not slow. I raised my own rifle and squeezed the trigger, sending a burst at its center of mass. Two of my shots hit, one searing into its shoulder, another grazing its neck. The flesh sizzled, and a foul stench filled the air. The monster roared, a sound of pain and fury, but still it came. In heartbeats it crossed half the distance. Now it leapt, powerful hind legs propelling it into the air in an arc toward us. "Down!" I bellowed, diving to the side behind the base of the shattered statue. The creature crashed into the ground where we had stood, claws raking furrows through stone. Laras screamed and fell backward, firing wildly. His shots went wide, one smashing into the fountain's rim in a puff of pulverized rockcrete. Before Laras could scramble away, the hound was on him. It swatted his lasgun aside with a swipe of a massive paw. The rifle skittered across the plaza. Laras tried to crawl back, eyes round with terror, but the beast pinned his leg. I heard the bones snap like a twig. Laras howled in agony. Janes shouted a battle cry, something incoherent, equal parts fury and desperation, and unloaded shot after shot into the creature's flank, trying to draw it off our comrade. The last blast scorched its hide, and black ichor splattered from a deeper wound. The hound's head whipped around unnaturally far to glare at her, one of its secondary jaws snapping and drooling strings of slime. I seized the moment to act. Ignoring the hammering of my heart, I tore a frag grenade from my belt, thumbed the activation rune, and with a quick prayer, "Emperor, guide my hand," hurled it toward the beast. The grenade clattered and rolled to a stop directly beneath the creature's belly. In the next instant, I was tackled from the side as Jane slammed into me. She had seen what I intended, and threw us both down behind the statue base. Boom! The plaza shook as a wash of heat and force blasted over us. Shrapnel whizzed and pattered against the stones. My ears rang with the concussive thump. I was up again in a second, ears still ringing, coughing on dust. Where the hound had stood was now an expanding cloud of smoke and pulverized concrete. A mangled, blackened shape lay motionless at its center, fluids leaking. One of its hind legs twitched spasmodically, but the rest of it was torn apart. The frag grenade's blessing of the Omnissiah had done its work. Relief was short-lived. "Laras!" I gasped, rushing toward where our youngest guardsman had been. He lay a few meters from the detonation site, blown back by the blast. I dropped to my knees beside him. One look and I knew his wounds were mortal. The entire lower half of his right leg was gone, sheared off by the grenade's burst or the creature's claw. I couldn't tell. His abdomen was sliced open from hip to opposite rib. Dark blood and worse was pooling beneath him. Miraculously, he was still conscious, though shock was swiftly taking hold. His face was deathly pale, eyes unfocused as his lips mouthed soundless words. Janes hovered at my side, jaw clenched in grief. She started to reach for the field dressing in her kit, but I gently caught her arm and shook my head. There was nothing we could do for him now except ease his passing. I leaned over Laras, trying to give him what comfort I could. His eyes found mine, and they were full of fear and pain. "Sarge," he gurgled, blood flecking his lips. "I'm here," I said softly, taking his trembling hand in mine. I mustered a small smile I didn't feel. "We got it, Laras. You're going to be all right." The lie nearly choked me. Tears stung my eyes. "The Emperor protects," he coughed. It was unclear if it was a question or a statement. "Yes," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "The Emperor protects. He's with you, son. You're going to see his light." Laras blinked slowly. "I'm scared," he managed, voice barely audible. I felt my throat tighten. Where were the grand words now, the ones the regimental preacher would have offered? My mind scrabbled for any scrap of prayer or rite appropriate for this moment. One of the verses from the uplifting primer came to me, and I spoke it haltingly. "Only in death does duty end." I recited quietly, placing my other hand on his forehead in what I hoped was a comforting gesture. "Turn your thoughts to the Emperor, for we all return to him in the end. He knows your service, and he will know your sacrifice." Laras's eyes seemed to focus a little. He tried to nod. A tear rolled down his soot-stained cheek. Tell my mother he began, but the words dissolved into a wet cough that racked his whole body. I nodded quickly. I will, I lied again gently. Rest now. Go to his side. A faint smile ghosted across the young guardsman's lips. He inhaled a last, shallow breath. Then his body relaxed, the tension fading as his gaze fixed on something far beyond this world. Laras, the boy who had carried our banner through so many firefights, was gone. I lowered my head, allowing myself only a single second to clench my eyes shut in pain and fury. Then I reached down and gently closed his staring eyes. Jane sniffed, quickly wiping at her face. I realized I was praying under my breath. Holy God, Emperor, receive this soul, one who died in your service. Accept him as your own. Ave Imperator. A distant snarl echoed from the alleys behind us. Not near, but not far enough for comfort. The noise snapped me out of my grief. The scent of blood from our skirmish would soon draw more of the creatures. We have to move, Jane said, voice thick but steady. She knew it too. I carefully reached to Laris's neck and pulled free the small medallion that hung there, a simple pendant bearing the imperial aquila. The chain had snapped. I slipped it into my belt pouch. A small part of me hoped I might one day fulfill my promise to tell his mother of his bravery, but a larger part doubted any of us would leave this world alive. Janes picked up the tattered banner scrap that Laris had held so tightly, now stained with his blood. She looked at me questioningly, unsure what to do with it. Keep it, I whispered. If nothing else, it can cover us when we bury him. I almost laughed darkly at that. Bury him. There was no time for that, and no guarantee we wouldn't soon share his fate. Still, I refused to leave his body to the carrion creatures without at least a shroud. We worked in silence, swift and solemn. Using a shattered door panel as an improvised stretcher, we moved Laris's corpse into a shallow shell crater by the plaza's edge. Janes draped the torn banner over him, hiding his still face and the grievous wounds. There would be no Emperor-blessed cemetery, no honor guard or volleys for this fallen soldier, only two comrades saying a quick prayer over a mass grave. Such was the fate of countless guardsmen on 1,000 battlefields, I knew. We did what we could. I found myself murmuring words from the last rite for the fallen soldier, a prayer I'd heard our unit's priests say over the dead after battles, never expecting I'd be the one to speak it. Holy Emperor, we commend the soul of this faithful soldier to your care. He lived and died in service to you. Take him to your side, that he may stand watch over us in spirit as we continue the fight. His duty is done, and now we who remain shall carry on in his name. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. Janes echoed softly, her voice raw. Another feral howl sounded, this time from the direction we'd been heading. It was answered by a chorus of shrieks from the ruins behind us. My skin crawled. They were closing in, perhaps drawn by the grenade blast and las fire. I checked my lasergun's charge again with automatic motion, half drained now. Janes reloaded a fresh power cell into hers. We shared a knowing glance. Two of us left. If we encountered anything more than a lone beast, our chances were slim. Still, we had to move. Staying was death for certain. We slipped out of the plaza, taking a narrow side alley heading northwest, away from the chorus of hunting calls. The alley was littered with debris and deep shadows. We switched off our lamp pack. Darkness was preferable to advertising our position. My visor had low light enhancement, but it flickered in and out, likely damaged by the blast or warp interference. Janes and I resorted to inching forward by touch and memory when the gloom grew too thick. Overhead, the warp-lit sky cast just enough sickly luminescence to outline the jagged silhouettes of the city. We crept through a maze of back streets and courtyards, doing our best to remain silent. I strained my ears for any sign of pursuit. Occasionally, a distant clatter or moan would reach us, and we would freeze in place, hearts pounding until it faded. My thoughts wandered as we walked, almost of their own accord, perhaps to block out the fear. I remembered the day we'd arrived on Habrium Prime, less than 3 standard months ago, full of confidence. It had been a routine deployment to put down a suspected chaos cult uprising in the hives. We were veterans of a dozen such pacification missions, and our commanders thought it would be no different. A few sharp engagements to crush the heretics, restore order, and move on. How wrong we were. Emperor, forgive our naivete. The cult, the children of the sable flame they called themselves, had been far more widespread and insidious than intelligence suggested. By the time our regiment and a few others arrived in orbit, half the planet's PDFs had turned traitor or been slaughtered in rituals. The hives were already in the grip of warp-spawned madness. We deployed into a storm, literal and figurative. I recalled the blood-red skies on the day of the drop, the feel of the air charged with unnatural energy. At first it was urban warfare against human rebels and heretical PDF. Brutal, but at least familiar. We fought street by street, block by block. Civilians were in the crossfire. We tried to evacuate them when we could, but often we arrived only to find entire Hab block populations butchered or worse. Those first 2 weeks were a haze of fire and blood. We took losses, but we were winning. We pushed the cultists back to the heart of the primary hive city, here in the capital. Then came the ritual. To this day, I don't fully understand what the heretics did, only that it unleashed hell upon us. Some high-ranking cult leader, a witch of terrifying power, performed a grand invocation atop the Cathedral of St. Dominica, the same spire I'd glimpsed earlier defiled. Our superiors had hoped to prevent its completion. We had squads moving in to stop it. My platoon was among them, fighting up the cathedral steps. But we were too late. I remember the moment the great rift opened in the sky. One moment, morning sunlight filtered through clouds of smoke. The next, a cacophonous crack and a cyclone of sickly light tearing across the heavens. People, soldiers, all around me clutched their heads and screamed as an unearthly pressure assaulted our minds. The air grew hot and cold all at once. Reality buckled. I saw the top of the cathedral blow apart in a shower of stone and warp fire, and from it poured them, the neverborn, the demons, the stuff of nightmare made flesh. That was the beginning of the end for Habrium Prime. We kept fighting. Emperor knows we tried. But against such an onslaught, all strategy collapsed. Companies were scattered, regiments broken. Those of us who survived became desperate bands just trying to escape the city or hold one last secure bastion. I don't know if any bastions remain. Maybe the spaceport is one. Maybe not. I was pulled from my grim reverie by the feeling of James's hand on my arm. I nearly swung my weapon on instinct, but caught myself. We had reached the end of an alley that opened onto a broader roadway ahead, the main avenue I had wanted to reach. It ran toward the spaceport. I could actually see the spaceport's outer landing spires in the distance, a cluster of skeletal towers against the tortured horizon, perhaps 2 kilometers away. If those spires were still standing, perhaps vessels had indeed taken off, or perhaps they were just empty girders now. The avenue itself was wide, lined by what had been administratum offices and hab clusters, many of which were now collapsed or aflame. The street was choked with wreckage, an upturned hab tram, piles of rubble, a crater that might have been from an orbital strike, and bodies, always bodies. But one sight in particular made my heart jump. On the far side of the avenue, about 100 meters to our right, was a chimera armored transport, or what remained of it, lying on its side. It bore the markings of the 301st, my regiment. Its tracks were blown off, its hull charred, but the rear hatch was open. Scattered around it were a few fallen guardsmen, and just beyond it, through drifting smoke, I thought I glimpsed movement, possibly more survivors taking cover behind the wreck. I held up a hand to halt Jane's and squinted carefully from the alley's mouth. Yes, there, a flash of flak armor behind the Chimera's hull. My heart pounded with sudden cautious hope. Imperial Guard, not creatures. The posture and silhouette looked human enough. Could some of our comrades have made it this far? It was risky to cross the open street, but leaving potential allies uncontacted would be a worse gamble. I turned to Jane's and whispered, "Imperial troops by that wreck. See the Chimera? We should link up if possible." She gave a curt nod. Reinforcements, even a handful, could mean the difference between life and death now. I touched the Vox bead in my ear, though I doubted it would function better now than before. Still, I tried switching to short-range local channels and voicing quietly, "Any Imperial units on this net? This is Sergeant Hale of the 301. Identify yourselves. Over." Static. Then, faintly, I heard a crackle and a distorted voice. "Hale? This is Corporal Santori, 145th Solstice Dragoons. Emperor's Mercy. Did someone hear me?" Over. Relief and excitement surged through me. The Vox worked, albeit barely at close range. I glanced at Jane's with a small smile. Reinforcements indeed. Perhaps stragglers from another regiment had gathered. "I read you, Santori," I replied, keeping my voice low but clear. "I've got one other with me. We're coming to you. Hold your fire, friendlies incoming." "Hurry," came the reply, drenched in exhaustion and despair. "We're pinned by something. We saw your grenade blast. You must be close. Pinned." That meant they were under attack. My mind snapped back to combat mode. "On our way." "Hail out," I motioned to Jane's. "They're engaged with hostiles." "Let's move." We darted out from the alley, keeping low and sprinting towards the Chimera. Immediately, the open sky exposed us to the full fury of the warp storm overhead. I felt a static in the air that raised the hair on my arms. The unnatural clouds churned as if aware of every tiny being scurrying below. Lasfire sizzled through the air ahead of us, streaking from behind the Chimera towards some target I couldn't see beyond an overturned APC. I heard human shouts, a mix of anger and terror. Then an otherworldly bellow answered, so deep I almost felt it in my chest more than heard it. We slid in behind the wrecked Chimera, just as a brilliant plume of sickly green flame whooshed across the avenue, splashing against the Chimera's hull with a hiss. Jane's and I pressed against the hull's hot metal as the unnatural flames licked around the edges, quickly dissipating. My eyes widened. Warp fire, or some kind of immaterium-fueled attack. On the other side of the Chimera, 3 haggard guardsmen crouched. 2 wore the grey and gold of the Solstice Dragoons. The third was clad in the remnants of a PDF uniform. They looked half dead from exhaustion and fear, but their faces lit up with astonishment as we joined them. "You're real, by the throne, reinforcements," gasped a man with corporal stripes, likely Santori, a lean fellow with a bandage covering half his scalp. The others, a woman clutching a flamer with trembling hands, and the PDF trooper missing an ear, gave weak nods of greeting. "Sergeant Hale, Brontian 301, I introduced quickly. "This is Corporal Janes. We're all that's left of our unit." "Santori," he replied, panting. "Our command was wiped out yesterday, just trying to reach the Emperor-damned spaceport. Same as you, I reckon." Before we could speak further, another roar cut through the air, I peeked out cautiously from behind the Chimera's rear hatch, following the sound. What I saw made my heart clench. Lumbering down the avenue, about 50 meters away, was a monstrosity that dwarfed even the previous demon hound. It stood perhaps 3 times the height of a man, its outline vaguely humanoid, but hunched and grotesque. Thick corded muscles writhed under skin, etched with glowing symbols of chaos. In one massive clawed hand, it brandished a crude cleaver-like blade nearly as long as I was tall. And the other hand, Emperor preserve us, was wreathed in sickly green flame. Its head was a crown of horns atop a bestial face with eyes that burned like emerald fire. A demon, true and full-fledged. Possibly a herald of chaos undivided, or one of Nurgle's greater spawn given the green flames and the stench of rot wafting from it. I didn't know the classification from any tome, but in that moment it was simply death incarnate heading toward us. It bellowed in a guttural language I didn't understand, but its intent was clear enough. It meant to rip us apart. Beside me, Santori cursed, making the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. That thing took out our whole squad. Emperor, save us. We can't kill it. The soldier with the flamer, a petite, hollow-eyed dragoon trooper, licked her cracked lips and whispered. We gave it everything. Grenades, volleys. It just shrugs them off. Burns anyone who gets too close with that witch fire. I felt a cold weight of dread settle in my stomach. A creature of this magnitude was beyond what a handful of foot soldiers could handle. Truthfully, our laser guns would scarcely slow it, and we had limited ammo. The flamer might hurt it up close, but getting near enough was a death wish. Janes looked to me, eyes asking the question, what do we do? The demon stomped nearer, each footfall rattling debris. It sniffed the air, perhaps sensing where we hid. We had seconds at best. I forced my fear down and spoke rapidly. It's slow. We can outmaneuver it in the ruins. Draw it into tighter confines where it can't swing that blade freely. A half-formed plan was coalescing amid my panic. We lure it down Palatine Street. I gestured toward a narrower side road branching off the avenue just past the wreck. Then bring a building down on it. That might at least slow it or trap it. Only chance we've got. The others stared at me like I was mad. Perhaps I was, but no one had a better idea. That street's full of collapsed habs, Santori muttered, thinking. If someone could bait it under the right structure. We did plant some charges earlier when we fell back, but didn't get to set them off. My eyes snapped to him. Charges. Where? He swallowed. A pair of demolition charges at the base of an old Medici hab, down that street on the left side. We were going to blow it to block pursuit, but then the thing came and scattered us. Hope, faint but present. Are they still active? If the wires aren't cut, the detonator's right here. He tapped a device on his belt. Short range, but should work if we're close. A plan crystallized. All right. We need to get it under that Medici hab. Where are the charges exactly? Santori described the building, a tall multi-story hab block with a distinct fallen Prometheum tank nearby. I'd see it easily, and the charges were set around its main support pillars, rigged for a directional collapse. Janes, you and... I looked at the flamer-wielding woman. Trooper Silver, she supplied, voice shaking but trying to steady herself. You and Silver head down that street now, I said. Find cover near that building, ready to shoot out anything's knees if needed to slow it under the structure. Santori and... I looked to the PDF man. Jurgen, he said hoarsely. Santori and Jurgen with me. We'll grab its attention and lure it down. Once it's in the kill zone, we blow it and bury the bastard. I glanced around at them. It was a desperate, probably suicidal plan, but grim determination hardened each of their sooty faces. Better to die making a stand than be run down like prey. We quickly divided what ammo was left. I shared my last grenade with Santori, since I wouldn't be throwing another in my state of exhaustion if I ended up the bait. Janes checked the pilot light on Silver's flamer, giving her a firm nod, a silent encouragement. "Emperor be with us," I whispered, tracing the sign of the Aquila on my chest for what felt like might be the final time. I caught Janes's eye. "See you on the other side." There were years of camaraderie and trust in that brief exchange. She managed a grim smile. "Yes, sir," she replied. We both understood the double meaning. Whichever other side fate delivered, we'd see it through. Janes and Silver darted off, crouching low behind debris as they made for Palatine Street. The Daemon caught a flash of their movement, because it let out an ear-splitting snarl and quickened its pace, green flame coiling around its free hand. I had to act fast to draw its focus. "Oi, filth!" I shouted, stepping out from behind the chimera, laser gun raised. The creature's blazing eyes fixed on me. Emperor, it was massive up close, like a walking nightmare from the depths of the warp. My instincts screamed to flee, but I stood my ground. "Over here! Warp spawn!" I yelled, and fired a lasbolt straight into its face. The shot struck it just above the left eye, scorching away a chunk of horn and flesh. It roared in anger more than pain. The wound seemed to barely inconvenience it, but I had its full attention now. With a rumbling growl, it started toward me, blade raised. I fired again and again, backing toward Palatine Street. Each shot left a charred mark on its grotesque hide, but none stopped its advance. Santori and Jurgen opened up too from either side of me, adding their red streaks of las fire, and even a few solid rounds from a stubber one of them carried. A couple hit its knee and belly. The beast snarled, increasing its pace to a lumbering charge. Its mouth opened, and an incantation gurgled forth. I felt the warp twist as that green fireball coalesced in its palm, ready to be hurled. "Move!" I screamed at the others, and we threw ourselves aside as the demon flung the warp fire straight at us. The baleful orb streaked past, splashing against the facade of a building behind and to the right. The wall erupted in ghostly emerald flames. Even from a miss, the heat singed the air around us, and I could feel an unnatural chill of corruption claw at my mind from the magic's proximity. I scrambled to my feet and ran into Palatine Street, half dragging Jurgen, who'd been slow to rise. Santori was ahead of me, reloading on the run. The narrow street's entrance was just wide enough for the demon, but only if it hunched. Perfect. It would have to stoop and be constrained by the buildings. It hesitated at the threshold, perhaps sensing a trap or simply struggling to squeeze its bulk in. It answered by smashing aside a lamppost and barreling after us, slower now, as it tried to maneuver its heavy frame. I saw the target structure up ahead on the left, a once sturdy hab building, 5 stories tall, with its front partly collapsed from some earlier blast. A large promethium storage tank lay toppled next to it, leaking foul residue. That had likely been part of its prior damage, if charges were set on the remaining supports. Janes and Silver were already positioned in cover just beyond it, I believed. The plan was to lure the creature right under that building's facade. "Come on, you bastard," I hissed between panting breaths, glancing back at the demon. It was about 20 meters behind, forcing its way down the street, scraping the edges. I slowed slightly, letting it keep focus on me. Santori and Jurgen had ducked into a doorway across the street, ready to fire from safety once it was in the right spot. As I neared the building, I saw Janes out of the corner of my eye, crouched behind the wreckage of that promethium tank, weapon aimed. Good. She was in place. Emperor grant our timing works. My heart was a drum in my ears as I slid to a stop just past the marked supports. I glimpsed the demo charges, 2 grey boxes affixed to cracked pillars. They blinked with a readied light. Emperor bless those sappers. The demon bore down, and I realized in horror it was even faster than I thought in such close quarters. It covered the last stretch in a few thunderous steps, and before I could fully dive clear, it swung that massive cleaver down at me with a roar. I barely avoided being cleaved in two. The blade's edge caught my left arm as I twisted away, slicing through my shoulder guard and biting into flesh. White-hot pain flared and I cried out, thrown off balance. I tumbled hard onto the rubble-strewn street, my laser gun clattering from my grip. The monster stood almost directly beneath the Medici Hab now, exactly where we wanted it. But I was at its feet, wounded and disarmed. It raised its blade again, both hands now gripping the weapon to deliver a killing blow. Time seemed to slow. I stared up at the towering demon, its hideous maw twisting into what might have been a mocking grin, flames still dancing around its horned head. Suddenly, from the side, a jet of roaring promethium flame engulfed the creature's face. Trooper Silver had sprung from cover, emptying her flamer at point-blank range. The demon reeled back, momentarily blinded by the wash of fire. It bellowed in rage. Its swing went wide, the huge blade smashing into the ground just meters from me, with an impact that I felt through the stones. "Now, Santori, do it now," Janes screamed. There was a split-second pause that felt eternal. Then a thunderous cracoom. The demo charges detonated with brilliant flashes, obliterating the weakened pillars of the building beside the Daemon. I saw the beast snarl in realization, starting to lunge forward to escape, but it was too late. With a groan of tortured steel, the Medici Hab structure came crashing down. I rolled frantically away as an avalanche of masonry and plasteel rained onto the street. The deafening rumble was punctuated by a furious roar from the monster as it was buried under countless tons of debris. A cloud of dust and ash billowed out, engulfing everything. I covered my head, choking and coughing, as the world seemed to come apart around me. Then silence, broken only by the settling clinks of rubble. Coughing, I dragged myself up to a sitting position. Every part of me ached. My left arm was wet with blood and hung numb at my side. Miraculously, I was alive. "Janes," I called hoarsely, spitting grit. "Santori, Silver, report." For a moment, nothing. Then I saw movement in the haze. Janes emerged from behind the partly collapsed Prometheum tank, dust-covered, but seemingly uninjured. She rushed to my side. "Sergeant, Emperor be praised, you're alive." Relief was plain in her voice as she helped me to my feet. Santori and Jurgen appeared next, clambering over chunks of rockcrete. Santori had a wide, crazed grin on his soot-streaked face. "Ha! We got the fracker. We got it good," he exclaimed, half hysterical with triumph. Jurgen just looked stunned, crossing himself and whispering thanks to the god Emperor. Silver came last, limping slightly. Her flamer was gone, likely crushed, and a shard of debris protruded from her thigh, but she gave a thumbs up through the pain. We gathered, 5 survivors now, a few more souls clinging on in this forsaken place. The street where the demon had been was now a massive pile of rubble and twisted metal. There was no sign of movement beneath it. Dust still swirled heavily, making us all cough. For a brief moment, against all odds, a surge of hope fluttered in my chest. We defeated it. A demon of the warp, slain, or at least entombed, by our own hands and the Emperor's grace. It felt like proof that even here, in this benighted hell, we might still have a chance. That hope proved short-lived. A sound began to emanate from beneath the rubble. At first I thought it was just settling debris, but it grew louder. A deep, resonant thumping, as if something huge was still alive down there. My eyes widened. The others heard it too. Silver let out a whimper, and Santori's grin faded. With an explosion of debris, a giant claw burst forth from the top of the pile. Stones the size of a man were flung aside like pebbles. We staggered back in disbelief as the demon hauled itself from its tomb. Its body was battered, one horn broken off, ichor streaming from cracks in its charred flesh, an arm hanging at an odd angle, but it was very much still animate, and enraged beyond reason. It heaved its bulk free with a snarl that rattled the remaining windows nearby. The scrap of a building had not killed it, only enraged and perhaps weakened it, but we had nothing left to finish the job. We stared, paralyzed by the sheer despair of that moment, as the wounded colossus turned its blazing eyes upon us once more. "Run," I croaked, barely able to form the word. "Run!" I shouted again, forcing my legs to move. There was no fighting it now. Our slim chance had failed. We bolted further down Palatine Street, away from the beast. It pursued, slower but inexorable, smashing aside debris in its way. We turned corner after corner through the warren of ruined buildings, with no clear plan now except to get away. The five of us kept together as best we could, though our cohesion was gone. It was a blind flight of terror, like prey animals fleeing a predator. My wounded arm burned with each jolt, but fear drove me on. Behind us, I could hear the demon's heavy gait and the crash of obstacles as it relentlessly followed, drawn by our movement or scent or souls. Who knew? And intermingled with that, I heard other noises echoing in the city. The baying of more warp hounds, the buzzing drone of perhaps plague flies, the insane cackling of cultists. The entire hive was stirring with the sounds of nightmares hunting. We eventually spilled out onto another boulevard, one I vaguely recognized. The sign of an old administratum building lay half shattered on the ground. I realized with a sinking feeling we had inadvertently looped somewhat. The environment disoriented us. In truth, we might not have gotten much closer to the spaceport at all. We paused under the arch of a fallen statue to catch our breath. My lungs were on fire, and each of us looked near collapse, adrenaline only carrying us so far. "Did we lose it?" Jurgen panted, leaning against cracked marble, eyes darting. A distant crash answered the question. It was still back there, though maybe not immediately on us. "We can't keep running forever," Jane said between breaths, wincing as she noticed my bleeding shoulder. She tore a piece of cloth from her tattered sleeve and pressed it to my wound tightly. I grimaced, but nodded thanks. Santori slumped down momentarily, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "Spaceport's maybe a kilometer west," he said. "Straight down this avenue." He chuckled darkly. Almost funny, we might still die within sight of it. Silver managed a weak, humorless laugh. "If any shuttles are even left." I looked down the boulevard. In the far distance, through smoke, I could make out the spaceport's outer gates, or at least the plumes of more fires in that direction. The darkness overhead flickered with occasional fiery streaks, possibly atmospheric craft or just warp lightning. It was hard to tell. My mind raced. Could we still make it if we just sprinted? With that demon and emperor knew what else behind us. Likely not as a group. One by one, maybe someone could slip through, but not as a pack with wounded. And then, as if fate conspired one more cruel twist, the night erupted anew above us. A fresh crackle of warp energy surged across the cloudscape. The fabric of the sky itself seemed to rend further. I instinctively ducked, feeling a tremendous pressure in the air. A horrible, keening wail resounded, and in a dozen places across the city, distant pillars of sickly light shot down to earth. More breaches, more damned tears letting the warp bleed into reality. For a moment, I lost all hope. They were opening more, not less. The planet was done. It was truly lost to the immaterium. If any ships still waited, they would be leaving now if they had sense. As I stared upward in despair, I glimpsed something else among the roiling heavens. Tiny specks streaking rapidly. At first I thought them debris or my eyes playing tricks, but one grew larger, roaring with an approaching whine. An aircraft. "Down!" Janes shouted, grabbing me and throwing both of us flat behind the statue's toppled plinth. The others followed our lead instinctively. A split second later, a shrieking object hurtled overhead and impacted a block away with a thunderous explosion. A column of fire and dust shot up, then another and another. We were being bombarded from above. I peeked up. Through the hellish sky, I glimpsed multiple small craft swooping. Thunderbolt strike fighters, perhaps marauder bombers, their silhouettes lit by the glow of their payloads. They were making attack runs across the city. The Imperium hadn't abandoned us after all, it seemed. Or rather, they had returned with final measures. "Airstrike!" Santori yelled unnecessarily, covering his helmeted head as another blast rocked the avenue further down. Jane's eyes met mine, and we both understood. This wasn't close air support to save a handful of guardsmen. This was likely the prelude to exterminatus, or at least a scouring to cleanse the infestation. High Command, or the Inquisition, had probably decided to sterilize the city. At this point, they wouldn't discriminate friend from foe on the ground. "Spaceport!" I shouted over the din. "Now! It's our only chance." Without waiting for debate, I hauled myself up and broke into a limping run westward, my arms slung against my chest. The others mustered their remaining strength to follow. Above, the aircraft made another pass, bombs whistling down. One struck just behind us, obliterating the very square where we'd just rested. The shockwave flung us forward, ears ringing. I tasted blood and dust. We pressed on, half running, half stumbling. The avenue was relatively open, terrifying in that it made us easy targets for any demons or the bombing, but it was the straightest path. At that point, we could only hope to outrun the destruction. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw shapes darting in alley mouths, likely civilians or even cultists also fleeing the bombardment. Some screamed prayers, others just screamed. A building to our right collapsed in flames as a bomb hit it squarely, showering us with sparks and debris. Still, we ran. Over the thunder, I caught a new sound, a deep droning hum that built louder by the second, approaching from above behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder and felt an icy lump in my gut. Descending out of the turbulent clouds, like a monstrous carrion bird, was a vast black shape. It took my brain a moment to register. A starship, or a part of one, coming down in an uncontrolled fall. The silhouette looked like a fragment of a shattered Imperial cruiser, wreathed in flame. Perhaps a wreck from a fleet battle in orbit. Or worse, a corrupted vessel plunging intentionally. Whatever it was, its trajectory was bringing it toward the city. "Emperor's mercy," Jurgen breathed, noticing it too. We had no time to do anything about that except pray it didn't land on us. The gargantuan debris screamed through the air overhead, trailing fire, and crashed somewhere behind the horizon of buildings with a cataclysmic rumble. The ground beneath us lurched violently from the impact, and a wave of hot wind blasted at our backs, nearly toppling us over. We had to fight for balance as debris dust gusted past. We kept moving, hearts in our throats. I didn't even fully register when we finally passed under the arch of the spaceport's outer gate. Half of it was blasted apart, but the roadway led into a large open concourse beyond. The spaceport sprawled before us, multiple landing pads and staging areas, many ablaze or cratered, the skeletal remains of shuttles and landers strewn about. One or two craft still looked intact on far pads, though whether they were spaceworthy or fueled was anyone's guess. Anti-aircraft turrets, now crumpled and smoking, indicated the battle had been here too. The five of us slid to a halt behind a concrete barrier at the edge of the concourse. There were figures moving across the tarmac. My heart leapt. Uniformed personnel, a mix of Navy armsmen and perhaps Inquisition stormtroopers by their distinct carapace armor and red insignia. They were herding a small group of civilians or adepts toward a waiting Valkyrie dropship. The engines of that craft were spooling up, dust kicking around it. We exchanged incredulous looks. Survivors being evacuated, actual evacuation, and an inquisitorial team perhaps, which made sense if they were controlling who got off-world. "That's our ride," I rasped, voice almost gone. We waved arms, shouted, did everything to get their attention, as we half ran, half limped across the remaining ground. One of the stormtroopers spotted us and motioned to comrades. Immediately, a few lasguns were trained on us. We must have looked a sorry, possibly suspicious sight stumbling out of smoke. "Hold fire," I managed to yell, raising my one good arm. "Imperial Guard survivors." They didn't fire. As we came closer, one barked through a vox coder. "Stop there." Identities. His tone was imperious and wary. We skidded to a stop as ordered, just tens of meters from the shuttle ramp. I could taste salvation so close. But these were inquisitorial troops likely, notoriously unsympathetic. "I'm Sergeant Hale, Brontian 301, I said as firmly as I could, though my knees threatened to give. "These are Guardsman Santori and Janes, and Trooper Silver, and PDF Corporal Jurgen. We've been fighting in the city, trying to reach evacuation. I didn't mention how many others died on the way." A man in a long storm coat, clearly an inquisitor by the rosette emblem glinting at his collar, stepped forward from near the Valkyrie. His gaze swept over us, stern and calculating. "Any of you exposed to the warp? Any of you psychers?" he asked sharply. I exchanged a tired glance with Janes. How do we even answer that? We'd all been exposed in one way or another just by being here. But I knew what he really meant. Were any of us corrupted? "No, sir," Santori piped up, stiffening to something like attention. "Just normal loyal soldiers, sir. Trying to get off this Emperor-forsaken rock." The Inquisitor eyed us, lingering on our injuries, our haunted eyes. I felt like a specimen pinned under a scope. I thought of the law. Those who encounter demons rarely walk away free. But if he left us, we'd die for sure in the coming purge. While he deliberated, the monstrous roar we dreaded rose again in the distance. Through a gash in the perimeter wall, not far behind us, the greater demon's hulking form became visible, pursuing relentlessly. It had followed us all the way here. Even the inquisitorial troops tensed, some swearing as they saw it. "Incoming! Get this bird in the air," one of the stormtroopers yelled. The Inquisitor's decision was made in that instant. "Everyone aboard now," he commanded. Blessedly, he waved us forward. We didn't need telling twice. As the stormtroopers laid down covering fire, peppering the approaching demon with disciplined volleys, we half dove, half clambered up the Valkyrie's rear ramp, along with the few other evacuees. I heard Silver cry out behind me and turned to yank her up the last step. Her injured leg gave, but Santori and I pulled her inside. The engines roared to full thrust. The ramp began to close, even as two stormtroopers were still firing out of it. I caught a final glimpse of the demon striding through lasfire, swatting aside troopers in its path. One brave soul stood his ground with a melter gun, fired a white-hot blast that vaporized a chunk of the monster's torso. It howled, but kept coming. Then the ramp sealed shut and my view was cut off. A lurch nearly threw us off our feet as the Valkyrie lifted. Through the hull, I felt the thud-thud of something heavy striking it, possibly the beast's last futile attempt to drag us down. The pilot must have pushed the craft to its limits, because within moments, the vibrations smoothed as we gained altitude rapidly. Inside the dim, red-lit bay, we all collapsed against the bulkheads, gasping. Santori actually laughed, a hysterical edge to it, as he embraced Jurgen briefly, both of them wide-eyed that they were alive. Silva was sobbing quietly with relief or pain or both. Jane sat down heavily beside me, closing her eyes, murmuring thanks to the Emperor. I let out a long, shuddering breath. Through a small porthole, I could see the burning city receding below, explosions blossoming where bombs continued to fall. The warp rift glowered over it all, but perhaps they'd deal with that more drastically soon. We had escaped. By some Emperor-granted miracle, or sheer blind fortune, we had escaped that hell. But as I sat there, the ache of my wounds reminding me I was still alive, I knew the nightmare wasn't truly over. Not for us. My gaze drifted to the Inquisitor standing near the cockpit door, conversing with a subordinate. He glanced our way briefly, his expression unreadable. We survivors of a demon world, we who had seen the true face of chaos, now found ourselves in the hands of the Inquisition. The lore and whispers were clear about what that often meant. We might face interrogation, mind wipe, or execution to contain what we knew, what we experienced. I thought of Laris, of Merrin and Salik, of all those whose bodies we left behind. Perhaps in dying on the surface, they had been spared the grim fate that awaited the likes of us. It was a cruel thought, but in the darkness of my fatigue, it felt true. Jane's hand found my good shoulder and gripped it, as if sensing my turmoil. I met her eyes. Her face was drawn, smeared in ash and blood, but she managed a tired smile. "We made it, Arden," she whispered. The first time she'd used my first name in so long. "That's all that matters right now." I nodded slowly. She was right in a sense. We were alive when by any logic we shouldn't be. The Emperor, or simple luck, had preserved us through the worst horrors imaginable. Perhaps it was for a purpose. Perhaps to bear witness, or to fight again on another day. "Only in death does duty end," I murmured, recalling the prayer I'd given Laras and countless others. My duty was not ended yet. That meant I had to continue, whatever came next, be it interrogation or purification or more battle. Part of me was still that guardsman sworn to serve humanity, even if my faith had been battered in that crucible of terror. Jane squeezed my shoulder gently in agreement, finishing the phrase softly. "And our duty hasn't ended." No, it had not. Though my hands still shook, and nightmares surely would haunt my sleep, I resolved then to carry the memories of those who fell, to keep them alive in my heart for however long I had left. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the vibrating hull. Images flitted through my mind. The grey, fearful face of Laras finding a moment of peace. The defiant stare of Jane's as she charged a demon twice her size. The black sky splitting apart above the cathedral. The moment I thought all hope lost, and then that miraculous ascent into the skies. There was no triumph in what we endured, only survival. And survival in the grim darkness of the far future was victory enough. As the Valkyrie raced away from the doomed world of Habrium Prime, I allowed myself a final silent prayer. Not for rescue or salvation, but a simple thanks to the God Emperor for the strength he had granted us to endure. And perhaps a plea for forgiveness for any doubts I had voiced in the dark hours. For in the end, whether by his hand or by our own, we fought on, In the nightmare beneath that sundered sky, we had fought on, and so long as we lived, we would continue to do so, against the dying of the light, against the madness and the horror, because we were Imperial Guardsmen, and that is what we do. The Emperor protects, but only through the sacrifice and courage of humanity's sons and daughters. On that day, on that Daemon-infested world, we had done our part, paid in blood and fear, an unyielding resolve. Whatever the Inquisition decided for us now, in my heart I knew one truth. We had not given in. We had not broken completely. In the worst of circumstances, we had remained soldiers of the Imperium, and if I were to die soon after, be it by an Inquisitor's pistol or a lingering wound, I could only hope my soul, scarred as it was, would find some peace in the Emperor's light, free from the nightmares that haunted the darkness behind my eyes. For now, I simply let the steady thrum of the Valkyrie's engines lull me into a half-conscious haze. The screams and howls of the damned gradually faded from my memory's forefront, replaced by the promise of a few hours of dreamless exhaustion. Jane's head gently bumped against my uninjured shoulder as she too succumbed to sheer fatigue, asleep or unconscious. It was hard to tell. I stayed awake a little longer, eyes heavy, watching the red glow of the cabin lights play across the faces of my remaining comrades. In each of those tired, haunted faces, I saw the same truth reflected. We had survived the unspeakable, and whatever came next, even if it was the Emperor's final mercy, we would face it together, as brothers and sisters in arms. My eyelids drooped. The last sensation I clearly remember is the warm streak of a tear carving through the grime on my cheek. Whether it was for the friends I'd lost, the relief of escape, or the dread of what was to come, I could not say. Perhaps all of those. In the darkness behind my closed eyes, I thought I heard a whisper, maybe just my mind conjuring a memory. Laris's voice, echoing words we had all spoken so many times. The Emperor protects. A faint, bittersweet smile tugged at my lips as consciousness left me. Yes, I answered silently into the void. He does. But only because we fight on in his name, no matter the cost. And fight on we shall, until duty's end.